these truths to be self-evident.
That all men are created equal.
As a member of Congress, I get to have a lot of really interesting people in the office. Experts on what they're talking about.
This is the podcast
For insights into the issues.
China, bioterrorism, Medicare for all. In-depth discussions.
Breaking it down into simple terms. We hold
these truths.
We hold these truths.
with Dan Crenshaw.
The Eagle has landed.
Welcome back, everybody. I have a great guest with us today, Rebeccah Heinrichs. Thanks for being with us today.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I appreciate it. So we just met a few minutes ago. You had spoke to the Republican Study Committee today at lunch, and we kind of grabbed you and said, hey, let's record a podcast on national security matters, strategic deterrence, some things that you focus on. I'll say a little bit about your bio, then we'll jump right into wherever the subject matter leads us. You're senior fellow and director of the you're senior fellow at the Hudson Institute, director of the Keystone Defense Initiative at the Hudson Institute, which focuses on U.S. defense policy and strategic deterrence. Serves as a commissioner on the Strategic Posture Commission and the U.S. Strategic Command Advisory Group and the National Independent Panel on Military Service and Readiness, adjunct professor of the Institute of World Politics in Washington, D.C., and contributing editor of Providence, a journal of Christianity and American foreign policy. That's cool. So, I have just personal questions. So you seem my age, if not younger. Is you read a bio like that? It's usually like a retired admiral or general. So what's your story? How did
If you keep reading, you get to the most impressive thing, which is I'm a mother of five.
That's pretty good.
Yeah.
Wow.
That's normally the thing that people think is.
That is pretty impressive. Yeah. Okay.
I don't know.
How did you get started in this?
Yeah. Well, I think we probably are close to the same age. I was a freshman in college when 9/11 happened. And that's when I decided I wanted to get involved in national defense policy. From a small town in Ohio, I didn't really know what that meant or what to do about that. So I thought, I was studying poli-sci history at a liberal arts university called Ashland University, the Ashbrook Scholar Program, and thought, I don't know, maybe I should just learn Arabic after 9/11. So then I thought I'd join a 3-letter agency or do something like that. So I took some classes at Ohio State. Anyway, make a long story really short, just focused my studies on national defense policy. Came to Capitol Hill, worked for a congressman on the House Armed Services Committee, got my master's at the War College. And so I tell people I'm military adjacent. I've never had the privilege of actually serving, but all of my work has been to support what DoD is doing and then try to get Americans to think smartly about the threats that face the country. We have a great heritage. We're not entitled to it, and you're going to have to fight to protect it. So that is the short of it.
Yeah, and you've been here ever since. I mean, it is. I think it's interesting how people get to where they are, because a lot of our listeners, I don't know, they might be in high school and thinking through what that strategy looks like for their careers. When I left the military, in my head, I was also like, I'm going to be in defense policy because I've been doing the defense. I'm going to do defense, and I'm kind of a policy wonk. I did my master's in policy issues, et cetera. And it's not exactly obvious where you just enter the quote unquote defense policy career. That's not obvious at all. And so it's always interesting to me see how people end up in these places.
Yeah. Well, then I kept digging, and I thought, where. My interest, national defense policy, but then I really realized that I wasn't all that interested in global war on terror, anti-terrorism things. I'm like, but what is, I kept kind of peeling the onions, but what is the thing where America derives its strength? No kidding, it's nukes. And so then that's where my focus really came. So in strategic deterrence. Yep. And
well, we had a presidential candidate who didn't know
what a nuclear triad is.
What the nuclear triad was. And I like him, don't get me wrong, he's been on this podcast, but all right, well, maybe we'll start there. So let's start there. Why not? I'm sure you deal with a whole variety of issues. We'll talk about China. We'll talk about Russia. We'll talk about what your message was to Republicans today at lunch, because I didn't get I wasn't able to go. All right, let's talk about nuclear deterrence. Why is that the most important part of American strength? How do we maintain it? What does it mean if you're explaining nuclear deterrence to somebody who's never really thought about this for more than 5 seconds? How do you explain it to them?
Yeah, so a nuclear weapon hasn't been used since the Second World War. We're the ones that used it, of course, to end World War II in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And ever since, the United States has maintained relative peace. Certainly, obviously, there's been wars since then. Korea was obviously a really, really big bad one, but nothing major on the scale that we saw in the world wars. And that's largely credit. It's hard to prove a negative. Okay, we haven't had that. So how do we credit that? But a lot people concluded that it's mostly our deterrence, how we think about deterrence. So we have a lot of nuclear weapons, and those nuclear weapons that they don't just deter major war against us. It's also foundationally like the bedrock of our military, of everything we do in the world, that provides extended deterrence. And so what my big argument is, actually, when you hear people talk about the liberal international rules-based order, what we're really talking about is a U.S.-led order. We're talking about we have been the biggest, baddest country since the Cold War, arguably through the Cold War, inherited, we had the strongest relative power at the close of the Cold War. And we really mean a world in which institutions and multilateral institutions and the global commons, things that really benefit everybody, but they were defended by us. And by us, we mean the military. But most fundamentally, it was the fear of the United States could do this again. We could unleash nuclear weapons. And
it's a pretty important concept, because I think for a long time, your kind of academic left has taken that fact for granted, and now your populist right takes it for granted in a very profound and dangerous way. There's a couple of different beliefs, and both sides believe different things. I think the left wing tree hugging academics probably believe that hope and kindness would establish the world order, right? Just us being nicer would establish the same, if not a better, quote unquote, world order, like a rules based order. On the right, there's a belief that you can still you can retract your power completely from the world, and things will just be fine. Now they don't like to hypothesize what that world would look like, but there's certainly a belief that it'll just be the same, if not better. Now they don't take the argument too much further, so I don't really know. I don't want to put words in anybody's mouth, but because they don't say anything. And
I would actually even say I agree, and I think that the two sides they also share a belief that the United States is actually the source of a lot of the problems. So
it's a recent phenomenon, but they definitely share that belief.
Yeah, it's a recent phenomenon, but if you listen to some of the arguments, it's sort of like, well, if the United States had just said that Ukraine would never join NATO, or that the Ukraine would never join NATO, that Russia would never have invaded Ukraine. If the United States had just tried Russia reset a little bit harder, then maybe Russia wouldn't have been so angry.
Loved and hugged harder.
Just harder, or tried, or just And so there is this there is this shared belief that the United States is a source of aggravation for the rest of the world. And so on the right, it's right now if we retreat a little bit more, and the left has some of that retreat as well. And they also kind of get friends and enemies confused, who are the good guys and who are the bad guys. But it's really interesting. But my argument is, even when we've done this badly, the United States should never cede power intentionally to other countries who are definitely, most of them are, they're adversaries, or they're going to pursue their own interests. It's not necessarily conducive to the interests of the American family. And that's how we should be thinking. What is good for peace, prosperity, and freedom for the United States and our democratic allies, but first and foremost us, and that will be good for them. I mean, that's my unabashed pro-American argument. And then you go in, you make your case, and you work with your allies to do that.
I agree, and you always try to simplify this basic concept to people. So, first of all, people will act in real politic interests, and that's a carrot or a stick argument. I guess they're gonna not act because of fear of retaliation from, again, the biggest, most powerful country in the world. That's us. And then they may act by incentive structures, but that's always going to be, I think, within a framework of reality, of realism. And to the extent, and now I think everybody thinks they're a realist. I had a weird debate about American leadership in the world recently. The National Review put it on, and it was an interesting debate. But one of the things I noted was that these sort of isolationist types, the people who think we should retract from the world, they're calling themselves realist. That's interesting. They took the label, And I was like, I'm not going to let you have that label. I'm the realist. You're not the realist. I'm the realist. Because I understand basic human nature. And I always tell people, look, imagine the world is a classroom, right? You know, with 140 people in it or whatever. And you're all given a certain amount of resources that you kind of control or at least have access to, because you don't necessarily control them if somebody else wants to take them from you. And that's the world. For thousands of years, actually, people thought that they wanted something from somebody else, so they went and they took it. And there was really no one to tell them otherwise, no one to say they couldn't do it. Let that buzzer go. This is how you know it's an exceptional podcast. It's right in the heart of Congress, because these random buzzers just go off telling us that we have votes in maybe 20 minutes. I don't actually know what they mean. I still don't know what they mean. Yeah, but about 20 minutes.
Figure it out and vote the right way.
Yeah, it's an authentic podcast. And if you haven't given it 5 stars, I don't know what you're even doing with your life. So, all right. So that was the world, right? You want something, you take it. And it's just how different groups of people, whether it's a tribe or whether it's a country or whether it's a feudal system, whatever it is, it's always about power structures. And it's a very unique time in history where that hasn't exactly been the case in the last 70 or so years. And that's only because of American power. I mean, is there any other time where we could maybe look to history where it's something similar like that?
No, and that's exactly right. And I've really tackled this sort of realism argument because I consider myself a realist, and there's two real categories of schools of thought: international relations. It's idealism and realism, and they begin with different, as you pointed out, anthropological assumptions about human nature. The realists believe, as you just laid out, that there's certain things about people that are the same in terms of the things that motivate them, in terms of greed and power and that kind of thing. But then you also have to look at the nature of the regime, and the systems of government, and there's different things about different countries that then also make them want to behave differently. So from my argument is the United States of America, yes, we need to act in our own interests, but our interests should also be aligned to American principles. And so you can't really separate them. It's this idea that, that if you're a real realist, you don't care about, for instance, American principles and things. It's like, that's not, I mean, we're going to favor the Brits and and the Eastern Europeans and NATO, because those countries are more like us and share our principles and ideas. And
but there's also a realist element to that, because we trust them more because they're more like us, but also that makes them more trustworthy.
Right.
So it's still within the, you can still make a very realist, like hard, like it's not about,
it's not starry-eyed naivety at all. No, it's real. But I think if you don't account for that, you can make really foolish ideas about the world, where I would argue those who say they're realists, and therefore it means you withdraw from everywhere other than Asia because China is their number one power. So there's this, this school of thought there. I would say they're not being really truly realistic, because they think that there's not going to be impact about how these other regime leaders, how our allies and partners are going to react when the United States just decides, for instance, okay, right. Europe, whatever,
you
Europe.
Think the Chinese leadership just isn't watching anything else around the world. They're not studying our interactions, our actions, nothing. They think they're studying none of that. You have to make that assumption,
right? And our allies, our allies aren't going to think that's meaningful. Because the other thing that I've said is, this has been sort of accused or smeared as sort of just like a partisan talking point, but I think it's absolutely true, which is that the precipitous withdrawal from Afghanistan did directly lead to Russia. I mean, it was part of the consideration.
Our friends in the Middle East and elsewhere, as I just got back, for instance, from a trip where it's amazing to me how little they need from us as far as just attention. Sometimes paid attention to, especially in a lot of these countries, just to keep them on board. And I don't think your average foreign policy critic who's ever done any foreign policy really comprehends or appreciates that fact.
No, and also people forget too. It's like what we were doing in Afghanistan was a NATO mission, and so when Joe Biden decides we're going to immediately withdraw from Afghanistan, and then he went in his basement and hid for a few days and didn't take calls from Boris Johnson, that had a real impact on our NATO allies. And I met with some of these folks, some of these embassy representatives who were really nervous about what the United States was committed to and would be willing to do in Europe after that. And so they're drawing the connections. And so, and then so for those who say, well, we're the real realists and look at all these countries who aren't behaving in their own interests. It's like, well, I think that they've got a pretty good idea of what those are. There's a reason Japan is supporting Ukraine. And Taiwan has been supportive of Ukraine. You know, these countries in this other really tough part of the world are looking over there and saying, oh my goodness, we better throw in with this effort who's supporting the country that's being invaded.
Yeah. I mean, and you made that, you recently wrote a piece called Empowering Ukraine Prepares Us for China. That's a key argument I use all the time when I'm telling people, like, why are we doing what we're doing? Is it because like we're for freedom and democracy? Like, no, I mean, we are. And I wish those arguments actually landed with people a little bit more just because it's the right thing to do. But I understand they don't. So I have to make different arguments that are just steely-eyed, hardcore, realist arguments. And this is a key one that you make, right? That the Chinese are watching. I always say what they have is they have a stopwatch, and they're just seeing when the time runs out. And that'll indicate to them how long they have against Taiwan, should they actually choose that route.
Yeah. So I would say like the freedom-y arguments, they come into play in this way, where I say, I want the United States to be the world's superpower, preeminent power. And you're going to have a world that is more conducive to democracy's flourishing when the United States is the biggest, baddest one on the block and the one that has the most power, economically, national tools to influence things to the American interests, so economically, militarily, et cetera. So my concern is, I do believe that China is the most capable adversary we have intent to take that role, to take that mantle from us, and they've aligned themselves with the Russians, and so it's not, you can't divide those two theaters. The Chinese want the Russians to succeed. So my argument here is like, no kidding, you do have to help Ukraine lay waste to the Russian military. And by the way, so Russia is still a top tier strategic foe of the United States. They still want to undermine and break apart NATO. That'd be really bad for the United States. And all the weapons that we're sending Ukraine, we're designed to do exactly what they're doing. I mean, these are old Cold War era weapons. We're really good at making weapons. They're designed to blow up Russian tanks, and that's what the Ukrainians are doing. And this is a very inexpensive way relative to what it's gaining us for the United States to do this, weaken this top tier strategic adversary. And in doing so, you stop the Russian advance. And that would be a big blow for the Chinese. The Chinese would love to have a weakened but victorious ally, for all intents and purposes, what it is, with gaining ground in Europe for the Chinese to break apart the United States' efforts in Europe, and then they can do all kinds of things in Asia. So it's when you have these arguments that are really neat and clean, that's when it's normally not true. It's more complicated than that. It's harder than that. And so what I argue in this piece is there's all kinds of things that we can gain for the PRC fight if we do this right in helping Ukraine.
Right. I mean, as you point out, it's really oversimplified reductionist arguments. I mean, a lot of people don't even believe. So luckily, there's pretty widespread agreement that China is a strategic adversary and seeks to be our adversary. That belief is not the same with Russia, right? Now, it just isn't, specifically with the populist right. And I think that's probably has a lot to do with Trump or what they did to Trump is a better way to describe that. Not necessarily Trump himself, but Russiagate, and especially everything that just came out with the Durham report. So it's much more of it's a politicized opinion.
Oh yeah.
But how do you tell people, look, I understand why you might believe that. I understand that Oliver Stone made some very compelling documentaries because he's a Soviet sympathizer, and he, by the way, is a left-winger, so maybe don't listen to those. But how do you explain to people why, because it doesn't make a lot of sense to people, why Russia, Eastern European country, has always sought to be our strategic adversary, whereas, what's the difference between them and Ukraine and Romania and Finland, all these other countries that are also in that same zone that are our staunch allies? What is it about Russia that is just, they've never wanted to be in that place?
Well, this is where, again, the people who are claiming to be like the most realist of them all have this, what I believe is just so naive. I mean, they're making arguments that the Obama administration made, which is the Russia reset. Why can't Russia be our ally? Or don't they have so many similar cultural things with the United States? And there's the Russian Orthodox Church. And so there's some Western-y things that smell the same. And so we should be able to do this. And the truth of the matter is people have tried. They've tried really hard. The Obama administration tried. The Bush 43 tried.
It's like the Russians have a say in this conversation.
They have a say.
They've said no.
They've said no. And Putin has been clear. He couldn't be clearer. He says exactly what he thinks. And it's like he sees himself as a czar. It's not even, yes, there's sort of like the former, he hated Gorbachev. That Gorbachev was like wrong and terrible and bad for making the deal with Reagan. But he's also, he sees himself as a Russian czar. And so he has these grand ideas about making Russia great again and all these kinds of, so that's just a decision that the Russians have made. That's part of how they think. And, I just got back from Vilnius in Lithuania, and went and spoke there on a panel and mentioned their government officials. Wonderful country. I mean, these Eastern European countries, like you pointed out, the Baltic countries, they're staunchly pro-USA. They're extremely anti-fascist. They're very anti-communist. Lithuania has been leading Europe, this tiny little Baltic country surrounded by the Russians, essentially, on being very anti-PRC. Like the Chinese came in and wants to like do their woo everybody and get them to buy things and investigate. Do all that. And Lithuania was like, what do we have to do? Like, what's the fine print? And the Chinese were like, well, all you have to do is sign this paper that says that Chinese communism is good. And the Lithuanians were like, no, we're not going to do that. No, thank you. And there's the door. And then just truly, like, we've done this. We're not doing it again. We're not going to do the communism thing. I don't care what kind you call it. And so it does depend on, the people and the people who are there, their long histories. It affects these little idiosyncratic things about countries, affects how they think about things. They're very pro-USA. I mean, they're talking about, they basically have the equivalent of a Second Amendment in Lithuania. I mean, the whole country is armed. I mean, they are just a really courageous, wonderful people. So, and just couldn't be any more different than the Russians, and they're very anti-Russian. Of course, then the Poles are different than the Balts. And
there's ethnic Russians, at least in Latvia. What about, is there in Lithuania too?
Oh yeah. They're all around.
And so so that's why. I mean, I go back to the question then, like, what is it? What do you think? I mean, he sees himself as a czar. It's almost like it's just ingrained in the culture to be counter-Western. I don't even know how to explain it all the time, like why Russia decides to be our adversary, because it is a decision.
And sometimes though, and I never say, and what I say too is like that, and that doesn't mean that we have to just finally and ultimately conclude that there's never going to be some breakthrough, because of course things are dynamic, and you don't have to be fatalistic, and you can always have an open hand open to to think that there could be some change in leadership at some point, but that has not been the reality. And so my frustration with this last invasion during the Biden administration is that, again, you brought up the confusion about, Ukraine, and there's some political things involved in the Durham report. That's why I was so angry about the Russia collusion stuff, was because it made it very difficult for people like me to even go in and explain to people, no, Russia really is a bad country. The regime is bad. They're anti-American.
Yeah, two things can be true at once.
But the intelligence community do themselves just such a disservice, is an understatement for how badly, when you weaponize it the way it was with these folks, you ruin the trust of people who you've got to keep a nonpartisan trust with these intelligence and the IC with the American people. But right before this last invasion, the Biden administration really tried again, like an Obama administration, Russia reset part 2. And if you remember, if you go through after Trump lost, Biden comes in, and the Russians did a bunch of bad stuff. And the Biden people kind of tried to sort of do the thing where we don't get really mad, because then we'll make it worse. And so, like the anti-satellite test, where we send astronauts up to the International Space Station, and then the Russians launch an anti-satellite weapon that blew up their own satellite.
Yeah, I remember that.
But directly put our astronauts at risk. Mm-hmm. And I mean, it was, I'm still mad about it. And it was like nothing happened. I mean, our astronauts even considered coming back at some point, because it was basically a war zone up there while they were up there. And the cyber attacks, massive cyber attacks from the Russians against the United States. And then of course you had the Biden administration decision not to enforce sanctions on Nord Stream 2.
Right. So they're testing, they're doing a lot of tests. They're very predictable in many ways, because Putin just acts like a bully. Again, a very realist bully who wants to act in his own interest, maybe not his country's interest, because it's hard to see how any of this really helps Russia in any real way. That's maybe a more complex conversation, but he gives you signals. He's a bully, and if a bully pushes against your chest and you back up, and you're like, all right, well, he's going to do it again, especially if he's Russian. Like, he got to go meet some Russians. This is how they are.
They're going to do it. He's going to do it again. And then whenever he saw the Afghanistan withdrawal, it was like, he's reading the room like everybody else is. And he sees what's going on in the U.S. And so he my understanding, I'm not a Russia expert, but my understanding from my Russian expert friends is that, Putin is a guy who he really is kind of, he always thinks he can fix the situation. So he makes the decision and then he's like, okay, this didn't turn out well, but I can fix it. And he's constantly kind of, looking at how things are going. And so I agree with you. Who could say at this point that Russia is better off now than it was before they decided to launch this full scale invasion of Ukraine? I mean, they're obviously not. But that doesn't mean that Putin is going to finally conclude, okay, now, unless the United States with our allies backs Ukraine so much, and I've argued that the Biden administration is still kind of trying to do this like both sides, kind of try to keep it even so that things Ukraine doesn't get too good here. And it's bad.
I agree. I think I would argue you have to escalate to de-escalate. You have to escalate both, not too much. You got to be very careful as you embark upon this, but escalate to a situation where the Russians no longer think they can advance. Because right now both sides think they can.
Oh yeah.
And you've got to change that dynamic.
You do, and this is, and again from the right before we've kind of talked around it a little bit, but this idea that the things that don't make sense to us as Americans doesn't necessarily mean it's not going to make sense to these other countries that are looking at it from a totally different perspective, different histories, different cultural idiosyncrasies, and they just don't. So I was looking at the Russians have 190,000 troops on Ukraine's border, and I'm going on Fox and talking about this, and there's other people on there who are like, they would never do it. They're never going to invade. This is a giant head fake. They just want concessions. And I'm like, I don't know. That's a pretty expensive head fake.
The warmongers are saying they'll invade.
It's exactly right. If you remember, this was like, oh yeah, no, they call me that. They call me all the time.
Am I the one who started the war?
And the only warmongers are the people who are launching this, unprovoked war against this sovereign country that did not pose a threat to the Russians. So, and of course they launched the invasion, but still there's this idea. Americans are especially, it's the West, but Americans do this. It's not our actually Eastern European allies. Don't make this mistake that they've had such a hard history. But we always just think that these countries aren't going to act in a particular way because we wouldn't. Like, that's so ridiculous.
Yeah, that's true. That does seem to be uniquely American. Not only that we think that, and then we also blame ourselves.
Yeah, and then we blame. Yeah,
this sort of self-blame game, which has gotten just way more popular than it should be.
Yeah, it's an American pastime.
On the right, on the right, and the left, and it's part of it's because we're so detached from the world. It is. Look, again, if you don't understand these issues really, really thoroughly, it's easy to believe that we can just build the iPhone here. Why do we have these supply chains? Like, why? And I'll get that question from high school, and I'm like, man, I don't have 4 years to help you understand global economics. I don't. You need to go learn it, and you need to maybe temper your opinion until you've learned some things. But people really believe this stuff, because we're detached, because we have these oceans, because Canadians are to our north. Mexico's a little more troubling, but we're pretty safe, just generally speaking, and so people can easily go down that path.
That's right. Or the other argument that I get a lot is, China's really bad. I got it. But I think all we have to do is, renegotiate our trade deals and cancel TikTok and stop selling farmland to the Chinese. And again, I keep going all the way back. I'm like, where do you think the source of America? Do you think that the Chinese, if China takes Taiwan, pushes the United States out beyond the first island chain, second island chain, we're out of the Indo-Pacific, where the bulk of, all of whatever it is, it's like 2/3 of maritime trade goes through the Pacific or something like that. Just huge amount of just global trade goes through there. Once they have that power and that lever that they can use, it is going to be just almost, maybe not almost is too generous. It'll be impossible for the United States to move in the world on terms that help us in all these other ways and domains if we are pushed out militarily. And that's why I always get back to, you're not going to solve any of this if you don't get the hard power piece right. And then you can wield that. If we maintain our preeminence, then you can, and our economic, strength, energy independence, all these things, you use those national tools of power to do all these other good things that we should do and cancel TikTok and everything else. I mean, I'm a huge proponent of canceling TikTok. I'm just saying that's going to be the least of our problems if we lose, the free and open Indo-Pacific. And that's where the last point I was going to say on this particular point is that, people kind of like, let's throw up the drawbridge and let's just make stuff at home. And then we don't have to deal with the military problem, to which I then say is, who are you going to sell your stuff to? Yeah. Like, who are you going to do? You can't, you're going to, same with Europe, like let Europe handle Europe. You realize that there's over $1 trillion of trade annually between the United States and the European Union. These are farmers in Ohio who are going to suffer from this way of thinking.
Yeah, it's just a complete misunderstanding of how anything is made. Global economics, just generally speaking, I mean, like there's some things we should do better at, whether it's permitting our own mining operations, so we can. There's certainly an element of that, but it'll still only take you so far. If you want the lifestyle that you're used to, and not a lifestyle from, I don't know, the 1700s, you do need a global economy.
Yeah.
And I point out to people, even in the 1770s or I guess early 80s. The French decided it was in their interest to sail across the ocean. Took a long time to sail across the ocean back then. It wasn't like a flight that they just took, and help Americans beat their strategic adversary, the British. Now, why would they think that? Why would they believe it's in their interest? So this idea that there's global interest in this kind of interconnected world, it goes back a really long time. Because I always joke, your isolationist mentality makes sense in 1850, but that's honestly that's too recent. You probably need to go back to way earlier, because I mean, even at least in the 1500s, you have the Spanish colonization. For some reason, they thought it was in their interest, their strategic interest, to be bringing their civilization abroad to the Americas. So you actually have to go further than that, for that isolationist argumentation to make any sense.
Well, and even now, it's like, okay, they do realize that our entire banking system, how our troops can even operate on the battlefield, all relies on space. Well, okay. How do we protect our space assets? Well, there's a lot that we're doing on the ground and at sea. Everything is interconnected, and so that goes back to there's a lot of education that needs to be had for how Americans' everyday life and their lifestyle and the American way of life is dependent on things that our military is protecting, and you can't just take one piece off the board and think that the whole thing is going to be fine.
And I had Peter Zion on a while ago. I think he's a really interesting thinker and talks about this sort of doomsday scenario that he believes is coming, where the world will just start to regionalize. Mostly and now one of his assumptions is that America will seriously retract from its leadership role in the world. And a really simple thing he points out is, look, as soon as the world goes back to this sort of, I have more power than you, so I'm just going to take what you have, which is what Putin is doing right now with Ukraine. He's like, I like their stuff. It really is that simple. I mean, there's
basically
also this sort of czarist idealism that he has, but it's like, Ukraine has stuff, whether that's geography, territory, or resources, or young children that he needs to repopulate the Russian population, which is kind of a disgusting, gross human rights abuse that Putin is engaging in. But as soon as you allow that world to fester, countries will say, well, I really like that cargo ship. It's got a lot of stuff I want. Okay, so I'm going to take it, right? I'm going to take that cargo ship. Well, what happens to insurance prices for cargo? They're going to skyrocket all of a sudden. As soon as that happens, insurance prices are going to skyrocket. What happens to everything that you want after that? It becomes unaffordable. You think inflation's bad now? Just imagine a world where the U.S. Navy doesn't actually protect world supply chains. Or at least just by nature of its power and threat.
Oh yeah, no, it's really bad. And then in all of these things, some of them, it seems sort of like, oh, that's so scary, that couldn't be. But then the Chinese gave hints of this during COVID. So, as they think the United States doesn't have either the ability or the will to use its pain-inflicting abilities, whether economically or militarily, and really economically is only backed by the military also. Then they start to make threats that they did not make even just a few years ago. For instance, when Mike Pompeo was going on and on about COVID origins, oh my goodness, where'd this come from? We got to know the Wuhan lab, what's going on there. The Chinese floated this threat in Chinese propaganda that reminded, I'm doing air quotes here, of the American people that our antibiotics are made in China, and that maybe our antibiotics then wouldn't leave China. I mean, that is one heck of a threat to be making about something that seems, the Australians got hit by the Chinese on sanctions because the Australians wanted to get to the COVID origins, et cetera. So there, you start to see just, again, these things that the United States is not used to, Russians picking Americans, just, reporters operating in Russia, and now they feel so brazen. And I mean, I remember traveling this is kind of funny, but like when Bush was president, I was a Hill staffer. I went to Saudi Arabia, and like, I just had this idea, and I know Bush administration did things that were wrong. I got check, but I just had this like idea that like, if anything happened to me, George Bush is going to send some JDAMs to get me out of Saudi. Yeah. And I just had this, like, I don't think that anymore. I'd be like, Joe Biden be like, sorry, or maybe not even sorry. You know, there's this sense of American retreat that the world is becoming less safe for the United States, trade-wise, travel-wise. That is a dangerous place. And the point, you and I were chatting about this before we started talking live here, is that it almost becomes like self-fulfilling then. If you lose confidence in our own ability and our adversaries, you know,
because you think every action you take is making it worse.
Every action takes making it worse. It does. You become you retreat even more and become even more fearful, and makes the whole situation worse.
It's like, oh, if we back Ukraine, we're starting World War III. It's like we're starting it. What are you talking about? Like, I don't even understand how your mind gets to that conclusion. I understand the fear, especially in the early parts of that conflict. But it's more than a year later. We haven't started World War III, so your theory has been debunked, and you should admit it's been debunked. Stop saying that.
That's right.
You know, like man up. Like act like an American instead of a scared, petulant, developing country.
Right.
Like, that's
that's
you're
right.
acting like.
Yeah. Well, the other thing too that's interesting. I know we keep beating up on the populists on the right, but I do it
all the time on this podcast.
Well, but I think there's a lot of really smart people where their arguments kind of fall apart when you start pushing. So they're, you know, like one of the things they say is like, what kind of foreign policy would you like? What did you like about the Trump administration's foreign policy? Like, well, they really loved that we killed Soleimani.
Yeah, I always use that example. I mean, you liked that, but you didn't like.
Well, when I say like, but how do you think what other country could drone an IRGC guy in Iraq but the United States of America? And why is that?
This wasn't some non-state actor. This was a card-carrying member of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard.
Yeah.
It's a pretty big deal.
Yeah, and we can't. Do you think that we're going to throw up the drawbridge, just have a big drone fleet, and then just start droning people all over the planet? Or do we actually have to care about alliances? Do we have to be forward deployed? Do we have to have a strong military forward deployed abroad? You know, this is to be able to do something like that, which totally supportive of going after Baghdadi, going after Soleimani. You do these kinds of things, but that is because of U.S. leadership and global engagement, where you do have the ability to do something like that.
Allies that let you have a landing strip for the drone.
That's right.
And I mean, just very basic stuff that you have to have in place, and that kind of education's important to say the least. I don't know if they called votes already. Did they? Okay, so we got a little bit of time. All right, but maybe we'll end on this. We got sucked down some very specific rabbit holes, but you talk about military readiness quite a bit. So what are we doing wrong right now when it comes to military readiness? What is the state of our military industrial complex? What do you recommend? Mm-hmm. You know, what did you talk to Republicans about today at lunch? What do we recommend that we do differently in our annual NDAA authorizations to make sure our military is ready for an adversarial China? So
my little pitch here was just that the United States, from a bipartisan perspective, we've thought since the end of the Cold War, it's a good place to end because we started here in your podcast with the United States inherited this sort of apex of American power at the end of the Cold War. And we squandered that relative power. And when I say squander, I don't mean it's like all gone. I just mean like we didn't tend to it. So we got focused. We kind of thought we bring in the Chinese into the global economy, and then who's going to want to fight each other when you're all getting rich? Well, it turns out they just, they just want to get richer, and they're still communists, and so they never stopped being that, and so now they're just rich communists who now invested in a military.
With a cultural sense of grandiosity, which is a really important point that Americans can't understand. We're not physically capable of understanding it.
No.
Right? We think the monarch in Britain is like a fun thing to watch, but we actually hate it.
Yeah, we're like, oh, that's neat.
We can't imagine doing it here.
It's
we
good
kind of
for
laugh
them.
about it. It's like a reality TV show to us. But that's an important point for understanding Chinese and Russian thinking and culture.
Oh, absolutely. And you have to kind of just understand that this is something, and again, it gets back to that sort of American inability to understand that this is how other countries think and operate. Okay, so now what? Well, yes, killing...
We have no idea what these buzzers mean. Nobody knows. You were a staffer here. Do you know what they mean?
I don't know. It means at some point you do have to go.
Sometimes
so we'll go.
There's like 6 bells, but now there's just like they keep just having this annoying series of 2 bells.
I don't
Nobody
know.
knows.
We should probably Google it after this. But
Google. This is the one thing Google can't tell you. ChatGPT can't tell you.
even tell you.
Nobody knows you. Nobody knows.
So, we didn't take this relative power that we had and invest it in making sure that we stayed so strong that the Chinese would never seek to contest us. We didn't do that. And so I know you're going to ask a question.
Well, but kind of not related. So
Well, what I was going to say is that so our defense industrial base, and what I mean by that is our ability to produce a lot of weapons at the scale we need to, at the pace we need to. We did not do that. And so supply chains, yes, but just like on like cold production lines. So, those things, it's just hard to like jumpstart this. So we've got in the past World War II, we've been able to like mobilize the country and produce a bunch of weapons.
Very different kind of weapons.
Very different kinds of weapons, but we're not set up to do that right now. And this is what I say in my paper, though, but kind of this interesting silver lining in the tragedy of the Ukraine war is that it has actually started up these cold lines again, and at least gotten some weapons that we're now producing at much higher scales. And you think about like HIMARS, which now the Australians want to buy, and that we can now sell them, and there's all kinds of things. And so if we have smart statecraft, we can be smart here. But what I say in the NDA, what should you do? And this is what I told RSC. You can go through the budget, the defense budget, and you can pull out all the woke stuff that's terrible, and it's just like it's a distraction to our military. It's terrible for recruitment. It's really bad. It's also just like not that expensive, so you're not going to get your cost savings.
Money allocated to woke stuff. That's kind of a long conversation. We've done a lot of like deep dives into this. It's in the military at least. It's oftentimes it's not like the secretary is like, hey, you be woke. There's no policy. It's these kind of middle management commanders like, we're going to do a privilege walk today.
Yeah. Oh no, it's bad. So I did this report where I cited heavily the work that you did with Senator Cotton on a lot of stuff, and I think Congressman Waltz and stuff. So yeah, I mean but there are DEI offices and stuff. It's just like, okay, you can go after those pots of money, but they're not going to be great bill payers totally for the or you're not going to.
It's a culture war. It's important, but it's a culture war. It has nothing to do with the budget.
It's important, and you want our military to have a warrior ethos. And so we need to knock that stuff off. That's really bad. Okay. And then you want to go look and see what else are we spending our money on that's important to Democrats. That's just an absolute total millstone around our neck, like the green energy stuff.
Solar panels on a base.
Yeah. So, okay. So you can pull that stuff out too. But what I told RSC today, you're still going to have to take that. You're going to have to buy missiles and ships. Missiles and ships. You're going to have to buy a lot of missiles for the Pacific War.
You've got to create the demand signal for the production lines that we've lost. I mean, to put it succinctly, because none of us realized it. Like you said, the Ukraine war really revealed it to us. So that's we're kind of thankful for that. But if in ways, and I point out that World War II, because people are like, we did it in World War II, but yeah, it was just basically putting metal together. Those weapon systems were not very advanced. They're very advanced now, and there's like 1,000 small businesses and small companies that create the tiny little widget that goes into a Harpoon missile. And if they don't get if they don't have 50 orders a year that they can rely upon, they're going to close down.
Right.
And you can't get them back.
Right. It's like ball bearings. It's like if you look at like our defense industrial base, there's like 5 categories that the DoD has kind of looked at, say we don't make these things very much anymore. And it's stuff like that. And then it wrecks, the rest of your supply chains. And so the thing that we haven't done as a country yet, and this is where I said Republicans have got to lead on this, because though I think we've come a long way and we have some bipartisan agreement that yes, China is an adversary, it's a threat. The Democrats, I mean, sort of like, institutionally, sort of just the way the party kind of thinks is they still want climate change, and so they still want deals with China on climate, and they'll
continue to hold the defense budget hostage against us to get that stuff. It'll always be that way, and
well, they want John Kerry to go get some new like climate agreement with the Chinese. And so now it's like, we're not even talking about Chinese spy balloon anymore, because that's really upsetting to China. And so it's like, it prevents the United States from making really big muscle movements that we have to deter the Chinese. And so what I told your colleagues is, the defense budget is still going to have to go up, because there's still a lot of things that are going to be, relatively, I would say it's worth it. So I even hate to use the word expensive, but it's a resource. It's the American taxpayer dollars, but our defense spending is still less than 4% of GDP. And there's a lot of other domestic spending that continues to go up that's really damaging to our fiscal, sanity, but you've got to do what the government is primarily responsible for, which is providing for the common defense. And the just retired U.S. Strategic Command Commander Admiral Richard, he left before he retired, just retired. He kind of had this parting warning, which is that Ukraine is the warm up and the big one is coming. And so we have to understand that. And so we need to be preparing now to deter what would be a horrific war. But we also need to understand that, the United States inherited, global superpower status, and we should snap out of this like declinism, defeatism. And we need to wake up and defend what we inherited.
How big of a shock to our livelihood and our status in the world, whatever you call it, our sense of security, our economic security, all of it, would a Chinese invasion of Taiwan be? Because people look at what's happening in Ukraine and they're like, I don't really felt it. I do point out a lot of their exports still get out. You might feel it more if Russia just had it all.
Yeah, because Turkey saved our bacon. I wasn't going to say it, but I had to.
It was too much. Yeah, it was too easy.
It was too easy. The Turkey kind of came in and was like, okay, Russia, like you have to let the grain flow, and like they helped us with the blockade. So it's like, okay, you get mass starvation
in developing. Again, we don't get grain from them, but you get mass starvation in developing countries, and there's a chain reaction there. I always point out too, neon. Ukraine makes most of the world, maybe 50% of the world's neon, which is a primary ingredient for semiconductors. There's a lot of
like our fertilizer. Our farmers need fertilizer. That we get, like all of that comes out. So the Ukraine war was. I mean, I was very, very uncomfortable for the effects that were going to have to the American economy when Russia first invaded. Depending on how things were going to go,
we were kind of lucky we avoided it. But what about Taiwan?
So Taiwan, what I tell people is, and this is tricky because you want people to understand how serious it would be without terrifying everybody, but I do believe that the semiconductor thing is kind of easier, I think, people to wrap their minds around, but I don't even think it's the worst of the problem.
Let's just make them here.
They think that, okay, so that part is obviously you can't just make them here, but let's say you even
not for a long time.
It
just takes a lot.
It would take a long time
to build up that capacity.
So economists say it would be global recession, probably depression, worse than anything American. I mean, our lifetime certainly. Have felt that would be sort of immediate if we were to lose Taiwan. But then a lot of it, then you kind of have to speculate about what China would do then. I believe the reason that Taiwan is so important is it really is it's geography and it's military strategic significance. Having China be able to project power from Taiwan would basically, I think, completely undermine U.S. extended deterrence to Japan, to South Korea. I mean, how would if the United States can't freely maneuver around there from a military perspective, then what are we? How can we confidently assure the Japanese and the South Koreans? So they probably get their own nuclear weapons. And so since we started with this in the conversation, that really is the beginning of the end of the American-led order.
Would we really hate it if more of our allies had nuclear weapons at this point?
Oh, yeah.
Time? We don't like that.
No, that would be really bad. So this
Japan and North Korea. I mean, maybe
the way I kind of think about this is you don't want to nuke in every pot. Nuke in every pot is.
I mean, look, the Japanese have a funny history very recently with their whole imperialist Japan thing, but still, they're an ally now. So.
They're an ally now, but you don't again, as somebody who's, the way I kind of look at it is I don't want to voluntarily cede American influence and power if I don't have to. That, and
you'd be more for, let's station our nuclear weapons there. If we want that deterrent, let's say that.
Absolutely. I say let's ramp up assurance to those allies. Let's flex our muscles in the region. Yeah. Let's be able to do that.
And that would be better. Like our submarines are a nuclear deterrent that nobody else has, and they can just be near Japan, and boom, it's the same thing as saying Japan has nuclear weapons.
Oh yeah, I mean you could do a lot more, and that's what the umbrella is. That's the umbrella that we extend to them. And so if the Chinese are able to basically take that from us, they have enormous leverage. You have greater instability, a lot more uncertainty, and then that's not the U.S. led order. That is something very, very different that we haven't dealt with since the Second World War, and so that would be really bad. So then you can kind of look to see, okay, And then you have to use your imagination. But if China has this power of the United States can't freely maneuver in the Indo-Pacific, what else can they do? What else can they threaten? And so that's the importance of Taiwan. And then you have the other things, obviously. It's a democracy, that would be bad. But to lose that. But that doesn't come anywhere near, I think, just the blow that it would have to America's ability to maintain the kind of world order that has really benefited us for a long time.
Which we don't really appreciate.
No.
So the more I think about these national security conversations, they're tough to have because you're always forced to argue with someone who's imagining the sort of counterfactual that you can't contend with because it's not real. Like I can't prove to you that history would have been different otherwise, right? I can make the arguments, but I can't prove it to you because the history didn't turn out that way.
Right.
And so you're always having a difficult conversation. And so you definitely do have to, and the more we talk about it, the more we have these debates, I realize that there's a real misunderstanding and a real ignorance on basic economics, which do affect people. And because that's always their question, like, how does it affect me? And, because they don't believe China will do them. And I had this debate that I talked to about, and one of the comments made was, well, you think China's going to do the 1,000,000-man swim to the United States? I said, no, they have a hypersonic that'll get here in 15 minutes. Like, the world is different. It's smaller. So, and then on the economic front, people have to, I think, understand where things come from a little bit better.
More space, getting back to that space domain.
Space is a big one.
I mean, we're so reliant because we are so reliant on space for everyday life. Our adversaries, again, they've been really working hard. China and Russia working, and the Iranians too, but China and Russia have been working really hard at being able to hold at risk those things that we value that are very meaningful, and that means those satellites in space,
Space, cyber, AI. We didn't even
AI.
get to AI. AI is terrifying. Jeez. Okay, maybe next podcast.
Next podcast.
I got to go vote. Rebeccah, thanks for being on.
Thanks for having
It was
me.
a lot of fun. Appreciate it.